Buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The Truth is a Meeting. The title of this conversation that we're going to entertain with Antonio Spadaro, our Jesuit father, who's the chief of the magazine, the Civiltà Cattolica, is something that we owe it to him, because this is also the title of the book that has just been published, collecting the homilies of Pope St. Francis in St. Mark's Church. He's introduced and edited this collection of homilies, pointing out to the exceptional nature, unique nature of such homilies. The words of Pope St. Francis makes us feel how close we are to him. Together with Antonio Spadaro, we wish to analyze in greater detail this major subject, again, the truth, as a meeting, not just as to pay lip service to it, not just as a speculation, but as the way to record an event, a fact, something that actually features in the horizon of truth, inside the material nature of our lives. If you read through the homilies held in St. Mark's Church, you may easily detect something that, as a matter of fact, made us invite Father Spadaro here to talk about Pope Francis. And this red thread is that the faith in Pope Francis is not something that overlaps the life of man, but it is just a new way of living. It is an overwhelming attractiveness, looking at all things. There's no point in time, there's no situation, whether joyful or tearful, easy or complex. There's no situation in life that doesn't fall in the life where the faith for Christ is all in everything, without the need to hide, to be part of mankind. It is all very interesting for me to see that for the Pope, problems are never hindrances, never obstacles, never objections, but rather opportunities. Indeed, he refers to the everyday problems that we have in our daily lives, that we consider sometimes as problems, objections, thinking that if something might change, we would be better off, or if the situation that we're in were different, then I could fully live my lives. Well, this is not something that the Pope does. Pope Francis looks at whatever situations we are placed in, or he is placed in, considering them always as opportunities. We heard Father Pizzaballa, and again, there's always a gaze of redemption with which men should look at things and at people. There's another important feature that I wish to highlight, because it also refers of the way with which Christian people are asked to to experience their daily life, to be comrades, to be next to their fellow men. And that is that to announce the new gospel, there's a good news that the destiny has not left man alone, but that doesn't just require repeating right principles. A 2,000-year-old doctrine is not enough, because what is required is the willingness to meet individuals, to meet the person in our daily lives, in the tangible situation, in the practical situation in which we're living, because based on what Pope St. Benedict said, also Pope Francis firmly believes that contemporary man might not necessarily understand the great words of the Christian experience. We have to meet up with our neighbors, individuals, trying to share with them, trying to enter into a dialogue with them so as to redefine the message. Otherwise, we are all going to be defeated. I believe that the true meeting that we can accomplish during our existence is the meeting up with our destiny, i.e., it is the meeting up of mystery with the mystery, the freedom of man. Now, before I give the floor to Antonio Spadaro, I'd like to read out just 5 lines of a homily held in the St. Mark's Church, because it tells about the tenderness and absolute freedom that God gives us, attacking man in most nature. When you're faced with somebody who's atheist telling you that he doesn't believe in God, then you can read out a whole library of books stating that the God does exist, and where evidence is given of God's existence, but still that guy is going to have no faith. But if faced with this atheist, you do show your life, which is consistent and based on Christian principles, well, then something is going to eat up in his mind. And it is going to be your very experience, your very truth experience, that is going to create some kind of disquiet within the atheist. And the Holy Ghost is going to find, again, good ground to get to this atheist. And that is the father of Father Augustine. Sometimes we feel scared before this disquiet, but for Pope Francis, this is the door through which the mystery, the God, the Holy Spirit can penetrate the heart of a man. Now, for a whole set of coincidences, sometimes mysterious coincidences, never a chance, you have met Pope Francis. And what can you tell us about Pope Francis? Who's Jorge Maria Bergoglio? Who's Pope Francis? After the wonderful interview that you had with him in August last year, as editor-in-chief of La Civiltà Cattolica. So you asked him, who are you? And the Pope would say, I am a sinner that our God looked at. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Alberto. Good morning, and good morning to you all. And thank you, Alberto. Thank you for this kind invitation. I feel a bit shivering before you because I'm not talking about concepts and ideas. I'm going to refer to you about my own experience, and whenever reference to one's own experience is involved, it's something that, in a way, it's greater than we are. It's something that develops within ourselves, and we feel that that opens up our hearts and minds. So I'm going to refer to you about my experience that has a face and a date. May 14th last year at 18 hours 55, I was about to hold a conference at the Capranic seminar when my cell phone was ringing. I didn't know who was calling. It was an unknown caller. I didn't know whether to take the call or not, and I was thinking I would say that I would call later. And then the voice at the other side of the phone told me, "This is Pope Francis. Hi." And so I was faced with the rector, and I said, Holy Father. And you can very well imagine what happened when I was in the seminar. I didn't know how to address him even, so I was wondering how I could address him. And he said, don't even address me, just talk. And this is how I get to meet Pope Francis over the phone. This was the first time I met him. Now, to cut a long story short, we did meet then in St. Martha's Church, and We met for Mass and then for a very small, short interview. And the first thing that he gave me, it was really a hug. He hugged me, and I can still feel his fingers on my shoulders. So that was not just but a formal hugging; it was a true, holding in his arms. And this is perhaps the greatest experience I ever had, that of being embraced by the Pope. After that, we had a meeting with the community of Civiltà Cattolica, and then I asked him whether I could interview him, and he said no, because I'm not used to releasing interviews. I'm very slow. When you ask me a question, it takes me 10 minutes to think about an answer. But then something happened because I thought I could see him thinking. And immediately after saying no, he somehow started saying, well, you know, maybe you can you can write down your questions, and then I can answer the question in writing. And I was very happy with that. So I wrote down over 20 questions, and I gave him this question personally in Rio de Janeiro during the World Youth Day. On my way back from Rio de Janeiro, he gave me another call stating, "Look, I've read your questions. We can even talk about that." And I can tell you that I spent 3 afternoons with the Pope. And, many people thought it was scoop. It wasn't quite that. It was a spiritual experience. So it was not an important day for me as a journalist, but something different. The Pope was on his way back from Brazil, and he was reacting to Evangelii Gaudium. But over and above this experience that I've been referring to over and over again, there was another thing that struck me, and there is the overwhelming grace I felt involved, something that I wasn't ready to at all. As a matter of fact, I don't believe that we are never ready to accept grace. Grace sometimes is something urging you, is something that puts you in a corner and makes you have a different vision of things. What was this grace about? Well, it was all obviously related to our meeting with the God, but then there was the reaction on the side of the people, because I was truly overwhelmed with different messages. So I'm quite present on the social media, so I was given calls, I received texts, Twitters, from everybody, from people living at the outskirts of the city to the ends of the world, people who had never read the gospel, people who was a member of the church that had left the church, priests that had left priesthood, people that were referring to me about their experience. So it was, again, full of grace. And having an interview with Pope Francis is something quite impossible, I can guarantee you about that. Because, Pope Francis certainly is not the person to whom you can address questions and with him, answering those questions. While I was talking to him, I thought I was sitting on a volcano, an active volcano. So at some stage I thought, I feel this, and he was somehow grinning at me when I said so. Well, Pope Francis is a volcano, is a calm chaos. The way he speaks is not linear, it's not orderly, it's not a well-formed syntax, is rather a set of waves of accumulations. His thinking is something that you can actually see. So there's nothing pre-packed that he provides you with. There's nothing rigid in what he says. He is reasoning with you. He's speculating with you. So there's interaction, when you talk to him. So he's not providing you with answers, but he is replying to your question, to your questions. So there's a progress. There's an interaction, and the interaction is made up of layering. The reality is more the idea, and this is one of his basic principles. This is one of the basic principles of his vision. The reality is always exceeding the idea. So I held this conversation with him, and I understood that there was part of the interview which I thought would be was most important, but it hasn't been covered importantly. When I asked him who the Jesuits are, I am a Jesuit myself, you know that. So that was a question that was very important to me because I wanted to understand what he thought about Jesuits, whom he thought that Jesuits were, and he is a Jesuit himself. And I was very much affected by the way he replied to this question. I was very much he talked about the Jesuit fathers. And I think that that definition can be adopted for any man of learning in Christianity. He said that Jesuit father should be somebody with an incomplete thought. I don't know how you would react faced with this. So he says, a Jesuit should have no finished thinking. Apparently, Jesuits should be those who have very clear ideas. Then being a Jesuit myself, I understood that was not quite the case, because he, as a Jesuit, said that a Jesuit should never have clear-cut ideas, complete ideas. And he added, Jesuits should have an open mind. Jesuits should always, always think, looking at the horizon, towards which he is moving, focusing on Christ, thinking about God. So, again, what he stressed was the need for an open mind, for an open approach. Many people called me, both journalists and men of religion, who would ask me, saying, what does Pope Francis think? What is his project? What does he want to do? This was most people were asking me about. And, well, I often said, you know what? I don't know. I might even say that he doesn't know himself. And why is that? Well, because Pope Francis has an open mind. He does have an horizon, but he doesn't have a set target. He doesn't have a clear-cut project. He doesn't have a theoretical, abstract plan to follow. If reality exceeds idea in guiding life and the processes of life, it is not ideas, but rather reality itself that develops before our eyes. So the Pope has no ideological vision of reality, but rather a vision which is very much based on experience. So he has an idea rather than a project. He has a spiritual experience that translates by degrees, that is then transferred into action. His vision doesn't refer to ideas or prefabricated concepts. He doesn't have a theology unless it is deeply rooted in a pastoral and experience-based circumstances. His experience is related to times, places, and people, individuals, as Saint Ignatius would say. This is why the Pope lives in St. Martyrs, so as to have a closer grasp on reality. He does so not because he wants to be poor. The Apostolic Palace is not a big palace. It's not a rich palace. It's certainly big, but he wants to live in St. Martha's Church because he meets up with people. At times when you travel around the area, you might meet him. You might come across. So he uses his phone. He's moving around. He doesn't live in an isolated way. He wanted to have close ties with the reality, close contacts with the reality. So his vision is not centered on his background ideas, but he is always holding an open dialogue with the reality, is closely related to experience, to the experience that man live. So he has no roadmap, because one of the main obsessions with the journalists, my colleague would say, that they always wanted to hear about the reformation of the church, that roadmap, a step-by-step plan, and so on and so forth. But this is not his idea. This is not his approach. I believe that he's very much before a road that is made while he's walking along it in its making. And during the interviews, he said, you cannot learn about ideas, you can learn about histories. So we cannot just base ourselves on abstract ideas. So the direction we follow basically is something that is in its making while we follow it. So the way he makes his decision is quite specific. I talked to him in the Jesuit jargon, as it were. So I used the terms of spirituality with which both he and I grew up. And so at some stage I said, how do you make your decision? You might not understand what the third terzo tempo is. This is basically a way to think in making decision, i.e. looking at the pros and cons and then getting to the conclusion. I understood that that was not the way he would proceed. And as a matter of fact, he said, I usually base myself on the second time approach. And anyway, I'm always waiting for a further confirmation. And what do you think he wanted to say when he referred to this second time? Well, for Sant'Ignatium, the second time in making a decision has to do with the fact that you stop, you pray, and you perceive the reassurance of God inside you. So when you are faced with a decision, you basically understand whether you're actually peaceful at heart or whether this is not the case. Maybe you can feel emotional, enthusiastic about it, but then you feel that there's something empty inside you. So I think that the pontiff role is extremely contemplative. So not only does he compare pros and cons, but it is not just the only thing he does, because he tries and perceive what our God asks from him. So basically, he has an experience of the finger of God touching our soul and telling us that what we are doing, that the decision that we are making is actually something that he approves of, so as that makes us feel reassured by his complacency. So this is a very spiritual view, but again, it is very much and closely connected with reality. So I'm not referring to abstract ideas, but rather the reality before one's eyes. As a matter of fact, the echo that our daily reality gives us, that is important. So the history, the experience, the meeting have the top priority on top of everything else. So this Pope is very much unforeseeable in many sense, many meaning, many points of view, because this Pope is really bare when looking at the will of God. That he is listening to the will of God. So. Our Pope has to be followed very, very closely. And as a matter of fact, I saw that important decisions are taken in due time. He needs a lot of time before any decision is made. So he tries basically not to have engagements and immerse himself in prayer so as to get to the best decision. And the place where his decisions are made is not his office, which is nothing but a small desk, by the way. Is really tiny. His ideas actually come to him when he's praying, usually early in the morning, and then in the evening when he prays there. And my colleagues from the Vatican realize that he is always having different commitments and he's busy doing many, many things. So it is very difficult to follow what he says. One day his secretary say, you cannot just follow him, you just try and accompany him, but you cannot really follow him because it would be really too tiring. I understood this Pope a bit better last spring when I visited in New York, a wonderful exhibition at the Guggenheim. It was an exhibition on Italian futurism. I think that nowhere in Italy was it such a nice exhibition held. So if you get the chance and go to New York, go see this show. So the subtitle of this show is Reconstructing the Universe, which is a wonderful title, by the way. And this enabled me to better understand the Pope. And I was looking at some paintings by Boccioni, Severini, Balla, with the very first rule that was adopted by futuristic painting and the doing away with traditional perspective, with a multiplication of points of view expressing a strong emotion and expressive movement. I believe you understand what a futuristic painting looks like, don't you? You know what I'm talking about, don't you? So what is the difference between a cubist painting and a futuristic painting? The cubist painting, like Guernica by Picasso or any other by Picasso, would be a painting that takes a snapshot of a situation with a static approach that is seen in with different points of view at the same point in time. So the richness of the painting is given by the multifaceted approach because, again, one single reality is identified from different points of view, as if more snapshots taken from different points of view were taken at the same time. And the difference with futurism is noticeable anyway, because the reality is so complex, and usually we only perceive it as the complexity of an object, which is there, but again, it has many sides to it. We talk about again about a multifaceted reality because whatever object might be represented is always necessarily multifaceted. Pope Francis resorts to a concept of reality where the multiplicity is not given by the multifaceted approach, by the same object being looked at from different points of view, but also by the movement of the object. So the multifaceted approach is not just given by the fact that you move around with the object staying still. So you see basically a face looking from one side, from the back, or the other side, and you present them all together. No, as a matter of fact, Pope Francis looks at the reality in a dynamic perspective. It is never still. So the representation of reality should include the dynamic nature of the experience, the movement. So reality is no static reality. Is no static element. Again, reality is never static. The reality is moving something. So you have to understand and grasp the nature of God in the flowing of the experience. In the message conveyed by Pope Francis, sent by Cardinal Parolin, a reference was made to Don Giussani in one of his sentences, and I quote Don Giussani: "The only condition to be always and truly religious lies or implies living intensely and deeply the what is real." This is a wonderful sentence, I believe. So to get to the true meaning of reality, we have to experience what is real without any foreclosures, without denying, and without forgetting anything. As a matter of fact, it wouldn't be human, it wouldn't be reasonable to conceive experience based just on the surface, on the tip of the way, without going deep down, detecting also what is underneath, what is, again, at the basis of the movement, what is underneath and moving. In motion, you can very well understand what is in here. So again, the experience is not a fact. The experience is a bit like the sea, a sea that cannot be understood if you only focus on the surface of the water, but only if you understand the deep dynamics underway underneath, where everything is in motion. Obviously, this requires a very deep speculation, looking at this reality that is ever in movement and that you can never grasp because your eye basically, or the beholder, is impacted by what is looked at. Because if you go away from yourself and you look at the ends of the earth, and that is actually the reality, then the way your gaze changed, the way you look changed, and then you can perceive the deep motion that is part of the experience. Hence, decisions, actions are to be deep-rooted and are to be accompanied by attentive reading of the signs of time, by time for prayers, and these signs are to be found everywhere, finding God in all things, and this is the motto by St. Ignacio. There's a book that I haven't read, I just bought it for its title. Searching and finding God in all the wrong places. There's no wrong place to find God. So sometimes there are battles of identity, implying that the Christian identity is a fact, something static. If you want to be Christian, this is the way you have to be. This is not the case. This is not how it works. The concept of Christian identity for Pope Francis is not a concept. It is rather a dynamic experience that is telling to us about our past and present, but also about our future, about our hope. Pope Francis in Korea, and I followed him in this wonderful trip to Korea, and what impacted me greatly was his message to the bishops in Asia, and he spoke very much off the cuff then. And to the bishops of Asia, Pope Francis said that we shouldn't give easy answers, quoting laws and regulations. Jesus fought with people that would hide themselves behind laws and rules and easy answers. He referred to them as the hypocritical. And Pope Francis went on by saying the faith, for its very nature, is not based on itself. It rather goes out from itself. So it has to meet up with people necessarily. And Pope Francis wanted to fight against the looking just upon itself of the bishops, which is always a very strong temptation. In Evangelii Gaudi number 49, he says, I don't want a church which is concerned just to being at the center and that ends up being closed up with obsessions and procedures. In one of the homilies held in St. Martyr's, and I was talking about that with Alberto, I was talking about these wonderful homilies. On April the 10th, 2014, the Pope referred to the risk of falling into the idolatry of one's thinking. And again, in Evangelii Gaudi, he says we shouldn't be fanatic. We shouldn't fall into the trap of fanaticism. And our identity referred to, again to the bishops of Asia, stating that our identity as Christians basically is made up by three main elements, i.e. the commitment to worship just one God, God only, and to love one another as men. Being at the service one of the other, and this is most important. And by way of our example, we should show not just what we believe in, but also what we hope for. And whom we trust. I don't know what you feel when hearing this, but there's a very interesting idea here. Our identity is not what we are, but what we hope for. So it has to do with our future aspirations. Our identity may be only understood if we feel attracted, drawn to Jesus, and not if we are just based in a dynamic of just being persuaded and convincing others. I have to feel attracted, drawn to Jesus. So I am what I hope for. I am not what I am, but what I hope for, what draws me in, what attracts me, something in the future that lies before me and that urges me to follow a certain direction. So Jesus is again something pulling me, as Don Giussani would say. And when the book was published in Argentina, when his book was published when he was still a cardinal in Buenos Aires, he introduced his book, he was presenting his book, and Pope Francis was referring again to Jesus being a pulling force, attracting, drawing to him. And Cardinal Bergoglio, the then Cardinal Bergoglio, when introducing this book by Giussani, was the reference to a personal, intense relationship, a concrete relationship with a tangible affection towards Jesus as a man. That enables Don Giussani to get to the threshold of the mystery, to speak with mystery. So again, the truth is a meeting, and this is indeed the title of our meeting. This is the title of this collection of the homilies in St. Martyr's. So being informal when we talk to God. And in in our life, as at the time of Jesus, everything starts with a meeting, and then he talks about John, Andrew, and Simon. They all experience some kind of wonder that made them all link to him, and it is wonder that generates this link for Francis as it was for Don Giussani. It is only wonder that may generate a link, a connection, a tie. So you have to feel the attraction that is pushing you from behind, pulling you from the front, and hence the discourse of mercy, as if it were just a good feeling. Flannery O'Connor, whom I recommend you read, by the way, talked about mercy again. And Bergoglio states that you cannot understand this dynamics of the encounter that elicit wonder unless there's the trigger of mercy. Only if you've come across mercy, only if you feel touched upon, and if you have been caressed by the tenderness of mercy, only then do you feel at ease with our Lord Jesus. Only those expertus potes credere, Father Bernardo would say, only if you've experienced tenderness, only then can you be actually close to God. Only then can you be at ease with God. And to experience such tenderness, you have to be sinners. Otherwise, you don't experience His mercy. So that then Cardinal Bergoglio would say, I'd like to invite the theologians here not to report me to the Inquisition, but I would say that the person who may best draw advantage from the meeting up with God is the one that can experience the mercy of God. So a sinner can best do that, because only being a sinner can I experience the tenderness and the mercy of God. So the Christian morale basically is the move, the reaction before this mercy that at times can even be termed as unjust because they don't deserve it. And yet there's this mercy that God has to shower me with. Pope Francis, again, felt very much at ease with God. The experience of God, the experience of this man, of Jorge Mario Bergoglio, lies with a mysterious relationship. I asked him, who are you? And when I voiced this question, he was actually look at me in great surprise. I felt a bit embarrassed because I thought that I had already, done something wrong. I had already trespassed. I had been very indiscreet. And yet he showed me, I can answer. Just I have to take some time before I do so. That's how he reacted. And then I remember very well how he told me, I'm a sinner. This is what he said. And this way of replying, was not the result of his readings. It was not based on literature. So it is not just common good or common sense. It was an real experience. So there is this mysterious experience that we have in our relationship with God. We have to be willing to be in awe and in wonder. And this is the, my opening remark. We have to be willing to accept an open mind, to have an open mind. As a matter of fact, to enable the people of God to express themselves, sometimes taken aback, sometimes, trying to say also something or saying something unusual. Sometimes he makes very controversial statements, but then he doesn't conclude with Evangelii Gaudium. For example, at number 32, he refers to the conversion of papacy. Number 15, the discipline of sacraments. Number 104, the role of a woman in church. What does the Holy Pope he make important statements. Sometimes he refers also to the fathers of the church, but he doesn't, close the situation. He doesn't say any. He doesn't make any conclusive remark. This is not because he's inconclusive. It's just because he doesn't want to have any discussion concluded because there's a way to make this to speculate. So the wall, the Pope is not a wall, but it is the enzyme that may lead the people of God, animating it from within. So he hates the closed thinking. In the homily of St. Martyr's, he talked about the closed thinking, which is not open to the dialogue. He talked about the possibility for there to be something else, for God to talk to us, to identify the way forward, as he did with the prophets. The proposal by Pope Francis is very much based on the prophecy. The prophet was said to be the one that would confer to the flow of time, who would see the relationship. The poet is the one that gives to the flow of time to interpret his relationship with God. So you have to analyze your spirit with an open mind again, to recognize and see God whenever he shows up. But in order to do that, you have to be extremely creative, because we rightly use to recognize God where we expect him to be. But our God hasn't abandoned this world. So despite the fact that there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of evil, there's a lot of hatred, yet our God is with us. We only have to understand where he is, to look for him in unusual places. As for the church certainly is a beacon. And what is the main feature of a beacon? The beacon stands still and shed lights. So basically, it shows where you can find shelter. So if you are lost in the waves and you see a beacon, you know where to head to. And this is one model for the church. But there is another model for the church that is very close to the vision of Pope Francis. And that is the church is a torch. What is the difference between the beacon and the torch? Well, the beacon is still, doesn't move, and shows you the way to the shelter, to the safe haven. Whereas the torch moves and goes where the men are, so sheds light on that part of reality where it is located. And if mankind goes toward the darkness, well, that is going to go where the torch is going to go to. So it accompanies men where they're headed to, and sometimes it can also shed light in the darkness, showing again that there's a danger. But you have to walk along. You cannot just stand still, pointing to the shelter, because then there are those who might get lost anyway. So the image of the beacon is not exactly the one that our Pope wants to. So the ends of the earth is not a slogan. The ends of the world, the ends of the earth is also the open sea. So a church is not just a small parish. It's not, or it should not be parochial. It should be a parish and not parochial, if you understand this Panan words. This is what our God demands from us. So The ends of the earth is the whole of the reality that lies away from me, outside myself. As the Pope Francis doesn't like the sphere. Why is that? Because all points on the surface of a sphere are exactly the same distance. What the Pope likes better is the polyhedron, because there are many facets to it, and this is how our reality is made of, and the facets are the different ends of the earth, the outskirts, the periphery. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a polyhedron, because that is the reality which is made up of different facets. So it is the periphery is not far away. So the ends of the earth is the reality proper, with all its facets, with all its high degree of complexity. So better to understand this, you should understand that Pope Francis is the first urban pope. Indeed, it is the first pope that doesn't come from a small village, but rather from a huge city. Well, actually, Pope the 12th, Pope Paul the 12th came from Rome, but Rome at that time was not such a big city. I don't know whether you've ever visited São Paulo in Brazil, or Buenos Aires. Such cities cannot be understood just if you sit in the center of the city, but if you actually realize how complex the city is, how big the city is, how articulated the outskirts are. So the throbbing heart of a city doesn't lie in the center, but rather in the collection of the outskirts. So how can we accompany people living all such processes that I've been referring to you about? Well, this is what the Pope said to the bishops coming from Asia. The challenge ahead of us is that we shouldn't confine ourselves to listen to the words that are pronounced by others. We should rather understand what is unsaid in their experience, what is unsaid about their hopes, about their aspirations, about the difficulties they have to go through, and what is closer to their hearts. Sometimes we think about the dialogue, obviously, and dialogue is certainly wonderful, but to the bishops from Asia, the Pope said something else, or something that made them make a leap forward. He said, basically, brothers, establishing dialogue is not enough. What the Pope said is, we have to feel in empathy, in harmony with the neighbor, which is very specific form of dialogue. So when you have a discussion, basically, you can have different views. When you establish an empathic relationship, you have to understand what is unsaid. You understand the experience coming from the other, the aspirations of the other, your neighbor, the difficulties that he or she is experiencing, even when those go unsaid. You perceive such difficulties, such experiences, such hopes, such attractions, even without any words are actually pronounced. So Pope is saying you have to lend your ear not just to words, but what the hearts are communicating without words. So the message that was sent to you, to the Pope, in the letter that was signed by Cardinal Parolin, he said, in a world, in an ever-changing world, we have to communicate using an understandable language. Only an understandable language can indeed bring about the constant innovation of Christianity. And once again, the reference is made to Don Giussani in his religious feeling. At times, we have to slow down our pace, to set aside anxiety, so as to look in the eyes, to listen to accompany those who were left down, were left at the margins of the road. And Don Giussani is again expressing the importance of this empathy, of the close ties with the outskirts of the peripheries. The Holy Father said to the Asian bishops, we should always start referring to God, thinking about the simplicity of His word that becomes self-evident and synonymous with the simplicity of our lives in the way we communicate. So before our eyes, we're not just faced with problems, we aren't faced with problems. The world is no problem whatsoever. The church doesn't have to tackle problems, does not experiencing problems. There are just a number of challenges that are need being taken up. And the difference between a problem and a challenge is huge. A problem is nothing but a wall before your eyes, something that has to be overcome, that you have something that questions you, but that you'd rather not have to deal with. Whereas whenever you're faced with a challenge, the situation is different. Because a challenge implies that you question yourself, that the way you look at reality should change, that the center of your life shouldn't be yourself, but rather Christ. So the way you look at things implies that you should always consider that you are faced with the horizon and that you have to have always an open mind, willing to look at with awe and wonder as God, that God that Saint Ignacio has always referred as God with an ever greater glory.
Diciamo, applicando il metodo dell'empatia che ci hai appena esposto, diciamo che sei un degno.
Using the method of empathy, I think that you are really a son of Pope Francis, because after the important sentences that you've pronounced, one would have said, you've said what is essentials, but then the reference to the uncompleted thing is something that is really important. I'll try and just put together the 25 questions that I meant to ask into one. I believe that there's a red thread in your speech. You said that the church is not faced with problems, but rather with challenges. Well, perhaps the most urgent challenge to which the Pope himself referred to in the Evangelii Gaudium when he invited Christians to question themselves on how to announce Christ faced with a changing generation. The eternity as revealed by God should be made attractive, persuasive, reliable with the passing on generations. And this generation, as the Pope wrote in his message, is one for whom Christ has now become somebody unknown, not just for the peoples who never got to know him, but also for our peoples, for us in the West, in Western Europe. And as a matter of fact, you referred more and more to this open attitude as voiced by the Pope, and that really greatly struck me. And you said that the Pope basically opens up a window, never, concluding or never being conclusive. And as a matter of fact, I'm quite taken aback by the number of times when the Pope raises issues rather than giving answers. There's an experience that many of us live. Also, based on Don Caron, the questions that are raised are more and more important than the answers that are given. So Caron is raising questions, the Pope is raising issues. Well, maybe the most important emergency at the moment is helping us and our fellow citizens and to raise the right questions, i.e. those questions that may enable our neighbors, our fellow people, to understand that answer through that animated disquiet. We're living in a very particular situation. If you don't know who Don Giussani is, and this is obviously a paradox, but what do you do if you don't know who Don Giussani is? Do you look at the encyclopedia, the Britannica Encyclopedia? Of course you go, you Google him. So those replies that used to be looked for with great attention are now basically available off the shelf. We're used to looking everything up on the computer, to Googling everything, so much so that apparently we tend to believe that every answer is readily available. But if you adopt this kind of vision, when again answers are readily available, we might risk to present the gospel as the book where all the answers are included, which is true on the one hand, because I believe that our pastoral knowledge is very much based on the fact that inside the gospel we find answers to all the questions that mankind might raise. But there's a problem there. It is all very good. This is certainly true. But again, we are bombarded by replies. We're given replies all the time. So if you present the gospel as one answer, well, then you can have just one more answer, as is true with a supermarket. When you have to buy tin tomatoes and you find 10 different brands of tin tomatoes, then you have 10 types of different answers. And oftentimes, the question that you are looking for is the sense of living. So at times it seems as if a piece of soap, a cake of soap, can be the reply to when people look for the sense of life. That could be just be beautiful. So we are surrounded, overwhelmed by answers. But there's something that goes lost, though. We find answers, but then we lose track of the questions. We don't know what are the most important questions, the fundamental questions, because we have so many issues. Again, we are surrounded by so many answers that we have lost track of the questions. So listen to the Pope's words in his homilies. Again, many questions are raised, and at times, as happened the Sunday before Easter, he often basically repeats the gospel, and then he says, "Who are you? Are you Peter? Are you the other apostle? Who are you?" Interactive homilies. This is why I define them, because he always asks us basically to answer yes or no. So sometimes this raising of questions is something that tells me that today we have to rethink about our pastoral when we present the gospel. The gospel shouldn't just be presented we shouldn't present the gospel as the book presenting all the answers, but rather the book that contains all the questions to find sense to one's living. We're all in the social media, so if you raise questions, you understand what is dynamic about the answering process. So we have to help people to raise the right question rather than to finding answers. And this is huge, huge issue. I have another question, if I may. Go ahead. There might be a little devil in ourselves when we listen to these words. Basically, you talk about the Pope. And You quoted again the attraction that of Jesus. You talked about the wonder and awe that enabled the apostles to feel attracted to him, and that basically can be a truism. But what about the little devil saying, what with all the problems we have, what with all the contradictions that we are living, is Jesus' attraction enough? Wouldn't that be synonymous with renouncing to react? There's a nice image that the Pope used, which I'd like to quote. He referred to the Good Shepherd parable. You know that he's the one that leaves the 99 sheep and goes for the one that was lost. Well, now what has happened is actually the opposite, in that 99 sheep have left. So Jesus is not the one that tells you come back just to take care of the only sheep that is in. The attractiveness lies with the urge to go outside, to look for the 99 sheep that had gone lost. The Christian is not the one who has a clear list of values of battles to be fought. This is not the image of Christianity as Jesus wanted us to have. The identity of the Christian, well, you refer to that again, feeling attracted to Jesus might be considered as a way to imagine Jesus as somebody reassuring you when you are one of the sheep. But this is not just the attraction of Jesus. This would be too boring. Indeed, the attraction of Jesus lies with the love for the world, because Jesus is not just in the pen with the sheep. He is out there. There's the image of the church with open doors. And in a way, he took inspiration also based on the words by Benedict XVI and Pope Francis referred again to the church as having open doors. But when we think about the church with open doors, we have to think that it has to have open doors to have people in the church. This is quite true, but it also doors are to be open because God has or our Lord should also go out there. So not only do we have to leave the doors open to have people in, but also to have the Lord go out there. When we have to find God in all things, it means that God is at work, as St. Ignacio would say, in the world, out there. This is where you meet up with God. So the attractiveness of Jesus, not just because you love him in abstraction, but because your eye identifies him out there, loving the world, loving reality with passion. Thus finding God. You look for God and you find him. So the rigid Christianity, the Christianity of battles, is not the one that loves the world, that doesn't consider the world as the place where God is at work. So the attractiveness to Jesus has to do with that main, strong connection that you find with God telling you to start work and go out there and work. Pope Francis talked about the Third World War, so he used truly dramatic words. And Pope Benedict said that the smartness, the intelligence of faith, should become the intelligence of reality. There's something really surprising about what you said, and that is with Pope St. Francis, we do away within this alternative. The faith basically has to do with reality, and reality has to be understood with another set of criteria. So for our eternal life, we certainly hope for Jesus Christ. But when it comes to ourselves and our world, we have to have, again, a general hope. I'd like to react to this question, reminding you about what has happened between February and March last. I don't know whether you realize this, but we are experiencing a very densely spiritual time. The first person who realized the density of that, it was then Pope Benedict XVI. There's a small talk he held, that he held in Latin, by the way, where he announced he would renounce being a pope. And that really greatly affected me. He touched upon two things. He said that he wasn't just that he was tired. He talked about two things. He touched upon two things that greatly affected me. He talked about the rapidas mutationes and the great challenges for the life of church, demanding new sap, new strength. So he really had a spiritual vision of what was at work or what was underway. And in between Pope Benedict and Pope Francis, there hasn't been a renunciation and an exception, but has been just, the passing on the baton. What do I mean by that? In a competition, when you pass on the baton, basically you run part of the race and then you pass on the baton to your fellow. And the torch basically has been passed on from Pope Benedict to Pope Francis. Pope Francis taking up his work basically very much where Pope Benedict left it. There has been a presentation on the wrong way of this renunciation. This implied that there's no recognition of the spirit. Between these two men, there has been a passing on the baton of a very high level. So we are not just experiencing a different reality, but just we are being invited to read the gospel in the very same way. So we are invited to follow our Lord's word. I would go on forever. I think that the message was quite clear. I understand that we cannot go on forever. There are two things that I believe were very important, but you said that this was quite an extraordinary conversation, and I believe this can trigger off also a new way to look at Pope Francis. So first, my take on message is that if you do without the history of Christianity, with the Christianity proper. So I understand that Christianity is something that is placed in a point in time, so much so that It was 6:55 of May the 14th when your phone rang and the Pope was calling you, so you could remember that exact point in time when that thing happened. And this, and I understand what you say about the unconclusive thinking of the Pope, because that beginning of the relationship established also how it would develop. God is the mate in the destiny of mankind. When we listen to that message, and I am quoting the Evangelii Gaudi, it doesn't mean that God forgives, that God forgets or about what has happened. Because this is the most important announcement, that we have to go back to listening with different approaches, and this is a different statement that has to be that have to be announced over time. So there's a beginning that goes on, an avenue beginning, because the surrounding circumstances might change. So it might be difficult to repeat today what I listened to yesterday, because again, the circumstances might change. How can I find words to refer about that today in a different situation? There's attention to what is essentials that have to prevail. Don Giussani said, summarizing his life, that the most important joy in the life of man is to feel God alive in the body of one's thought and heart. As for the rest, it is all delusion. And I'm repeating to myself this sentence over and over again, and he refers to the fleshes of one thinking and heart. So not in abstract, not in spiritual meditation, despite it all being necessary, but, in the material aspect of one's lives. So when I repeat this sentence by Don Giussani, I'm always thinking again about him, but I see also Pope Francis, who's just but supported by this experience, by this certainty. That makes it all more exciting for us to yield to attractiveness of Christ. Thanks to Don Caron and all of us in the movement of communion and the liberation, we feel that destiny never leaves us alone. Thank you very much again, and I'd like you to report to God that to the Pope, that we all thank you, and please bring him our best regards, coming from each one of us. Thank you.